On a Sunday morning in February 2023, thousands of people packed into a sanctuary in Inglewood, California, to witness something that almost never happens cleanly in American church life. A pastor was leaving on his own terms. No scandal, no forced resignation, no congregation split in half by controversy. Just a man, 41 years into a calling, standing up to preach his very last sermon as senior pastor and somehow making it feel like a celebration instead of a funeral. His name is Bishop Kenneth C. Ulmer, and for 4 decades he built one of the most influential Black churches in America, almost from nothing. This is the story of how he did it, why he chose to walk away at the height of his influence, and what his exit can teach every leader, every founder, and every one of us about how to let go of something we love without destroying it on the way out. To understand why Ulmer's departure mattered so much, you have to understand what he actually built. Faithful Central Bible Church was founded in 1936, and by the time Ulmer took over as its 3rd senior pastor in 1982, it had roughly 350 members. He wasn't the obvious choice. He was still a young pastor running Macedonia Bible Church, a congregation he had founded himself in San Pedro, California, and his path into ministry hadn't even been a traditional one. He grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois, came up through the church playing piano and organ, and earned his college degree not in theology, but in broadcasting and music from the University of Illinois. He didn't answer the call to preach until his 30s, relatively late compared to many of his peers, and he has said that while most of his ministry friends started preaching in high school, his own journey ran through music first. When the leadership at Faithful Central called on him, he didn't come alone. He brought his entire existing congregation with him, merging 2 churches into one and setting the stage for what would become a Los Angeles institution. Under his leadership, that congregation of 350 grew into a megachurch of well over 10,000 members, and Ulmer didn't just grow a crowd. He restructured the entire institution. He guided the church through a name and identity shift, moving it toward what's often described as a moderate Pentecostal tradition, and he deliberately pushed it away from being a personality-driven ministry that lived and died by one man's charisma and toward a staff-oriented structure built to outlast him. That single decision, made years before he ever announced his retirement, turns out to be one of the most important details in this entire story, because it's the difference between a church that survives its founder and one that doesn't. And then there's the Forum. In the year 2000, under Ulmer's leadership, Faithful Central did something almost no church in America had done before. It purchased the Great Western Forum, the legendary arena in Inglewood that had been home to the Los Angeles Lakers during the Showtime era of Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The church didn't just use it as a sanctuary. It operated the Forum as a working commercial entertainment venue, hosting concerts for major touring artists, all while using the space for worship. It was a bold, almost unheard of move for a religious institution, blending ministry with real estate and entertainment strategy in a way that gave the church both cultural visibility and financial muscle. In 2013, the church sold the Forum to Madison Square Garden Company, a transaction reported to have been highly profitable, giving Faithful Central resources to expand its mission well beyond Sunday mornings. Because Ulmer never treated ministry as just what happened inside 4 walls. In 2016, he launched the Ulmer Institute, a nonprofit built to research, train, and treat people dealing with urban psychological trauma, the kind that comes from shootings, stabbings, and the everyday violence that too many South Los Angeles neighborhoods have had to live with. He also built the Champion Counseling Center, which became one of the more respected community mental health resources in the area, training university students, earning their clinical hours while serving everyday families for free or at low cost. On top of running a megachurch, he was teaching. He held faculty and advisory positions at Biola University, Pepperdine University, and Fuller Theological Seminary, and he later became senior advisor to the president of Biola, co-leading a doctoral program there. He earned a PhD from Grace Graduate School of Theology with a dissertation exploring the theology embedded in Black church music, and he pursued additional postgraduate study at Oxford, at Hebrew Union College, and at the University of Judaism. An unusually wide-ranging academic path for a Baptist-rooted preacher. He wrote at least 6 books. And internationally, he served as presiding bishop over the Macedonia International Bible Fellowship, a network of pastors based in Johannesburg, South Africa. By any measure, this was not a man running out of ideas or influence when he decided to step down. He was, if anything, still expanding. So, why leave? That's the question that makes this story genuinely interesting, because in American church culture, succession is often where things go wrong. Researchers and denominational leaders have pointed out for years that most churches never really recover the momentum they had under a long-tenured, high-profile founding pastor once that person exits, whether by retirement, death, or scandal. Ulmer himself has said, bluntly, that the church as a whole is bad at 2 things: restoring leaders who fall and transitioning leaders who don't. He's pointed to the wave of major evangelical voices that once dominated Los Angeles pulpits, different denominations, different neighborhoods, all of them larger than life in their moment, and noted that once those men left, in many cases you simply stopped hearing about their churches at all. He didn't want Faithful Central to become another example of that pattern. So, roughly 7 years before his final sermon, Ulmer began quietly mentoring a young pastor named John Paul Foster. Known to the congregation as J.P. Foster's own story is almost a movie in itself. He originally set out to become a neurosurgeon, but during his junior year of college, he felt a pull away from medicine and into ministry, a shift he describes as God ordering his steps before he even understood what that meant. He did his undergraduate work at Biola University, went on to seminary, and eventually pursued a doctoral program of his own. He joined Faithful Central in 2015 as the young adult pastor, was elevated to assistant pastor in 2019, and became co-pastor in 2021. Each step a deliberate rung on a ladder Ulmer had built specifically for him. Ulmer has described their relationship using the language of Moses and Joshua from the Old Testament, the idea that a Moses figure can see farther than he will ever personally go, while a Joshua figure is destined to go farther than he can currently see. Ulmer says he recognized in his own spirit that his season, what he calls his Moses season, was ending, and that Foster was the Joshua meant to lead the next chapter. What actually happened during that 7-year mentorship is worth slowing down on, because it's rare for a succession plan to be this deliberate. Ulmer began by simply letting Foster run staff meetings, sometimes staying silent through the whole thing, sometimes offering a pointed note afterward about tone or clarity. Eventually, he trusted Foster enough that he didn't even need to be in the room. Then came the pulpit itself. Ulmer started splitting the preaching schedule, giving Foster 1 Sunday a month, then 2, deliberately building his credibility and his bond with the congregation in real time, rather than announcing him overnight as a stranger wearing someone else's title. When it came time to plan budgets and staffing for the year of transition, Ulmer sat Foster down and asked him directly what he would need to succeed, so the numbers could be built around Foster's vision rather than simply inherited from Ulmer's old one. And in one detail that both men say mattered more than almost anything else, Ulmer made a point of personally checking in on Foster's wife and children throughout the process, calling to ask how she was holding up during the months her husband was pulled in a dozen directions at once. Foster has said that gesture, a leader caring not just about the institution but about his successor's family, meant more to him than any formal handoff of authority ever could. Ulmer publicly announced the transition a full year before it happened, which gave the congregation something most churches never get: time. Time to be upset, time to ask questions, time to grieve the version of the church they'd known for decades, and time to come around to what was coming next, all before the actual change ever took place. That single choice, giving people 12 months to process an emotional shift rather than a matter of weeks, is a big part of why the transition avoided the kind of institutional shockwave that has ended so many other long-tenured ministries. The final weeks were structured almost like a series of ceremonial handoffs rather than a single abrupt ending. On February 5, 2023, the church held the installation of Foster as the incoming senior pastor, while Ulmer was still technically in the role. The following Sunday, February 12, Ulmer led worship one more time in the church's main sanctuary, known as the Tabernacle, in a service that doubled as a reunion for the church's music and arts ministries built up over 4 decades. On Friday, February 17, the church hosted a special evening honoring Ulmer's wife, Togetta Ulmer, who by then had stood beside him for more than 4 decades of ministry and marriage. And then, on Sunday, February 19, 2023, Bishop Kenneth Ulmer delivered his final sermon as senior pastor of Faithful Central Bible Church, titled, "I Did My Best," drawing from a passage in 2 Timothy where the Apostle Paul, near the end of his own life, reflects that he had fought the good fight and finished the race. Ulmer has said those very words, "I fought a good fight," are inscribed on his own father's gravestone, which gives that final sermon an even heavier, more personal weight than the congregation may have realized in the moment. Speaking to reporters that day, Ulmer summed up his own goal in strikingly simple terms. He wanted to finish well, and he wanted to be well when he finished. A distinction that speaks volumes about how differently he approached his exit compared to so many leaders who wait until health or scandal forces the decision for them. That evening, the celebration shifted from the pulpit to the stage. A citywide tribute concert was held at the 5,000-seat West Angeles Cathedral on Crenshaw Boulevard, honoring Ulmer's 40 years of ministry with an evening of gospel music and public tribute. Reporting on the event noted appearances from major names in gospel and entertainment circles, including Bebe Winans, and even a moment from Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. Reflecting just how far Ulmer's influence had reached beyond the walls of his own congregation and into the civic and cultural life of the city itself. 1 week later, on February 26, 2023, John Paul Foster stepped into the pulpit and delivered his very first sermon as the 4th senior pastor in Faithful Central's 87-year history, officially closing one chapter and opening another in front of the same congregation that had just spent a month saying goodbye to the man who came before him. Ulmer didn't disappear after that. He now holds the title of Bishop Emeritus, and he's continued teaching, writing, and speaking, including reflecting publicly and candidly on just how disorienting this new chapter has actually felt. In interviews since his retirement, he's talked about the emotional cost of stepping away from a role that had structured literally every rhythm of his life for 4 decades, describing ministry itself as, in his words, a lonely business, and admitting that losing the built-in schedule of sermon prep, pastoral care, and Sunday mornings left him needing to find an entirely new rhythm for his days. He's spoken about the shift from occupying what he calls a seat of authority to occupying a seat of honor instead. A subtle but massive change in identity for anyone who has spent their entire adult life being the person everyone looks to for answers. He's remained connected globally, traveling to places like Amsterdam and Zurich for ministry engagements, staying active with Biola University's leadership, and continuing to shepherd the international network of pastors under the Macedonia International Bible Fellowship. And he's been honest that not everyone in the congregation transitioned their loyalty instantly. He shared the story of a church member calling him personally, not Foster, just hours after her son had been killed, simply because he was the pastor she had always known. A small but telling reminder that even the best planned succession can't erase decades of personal relationship overnight, and that Foster would have to earn that same trust, one family, one crisis, one funeral at a time. Meanwhile, Foster has been candid about his own side of the challenge, admitting that stepping into a pulpit long occupied by one of the most dynamic and nationally known preachers in the country meant he was never going to win by trying to outperform his predecessor. Instead, he's focused on preaching scripture as directly and faithfully as he can, being personally present with older members who wondered what would happen to them under new leadership, and pouring energy into the areas he sees as the church's next frontier, including its counseling center, new children and family ministries, a planned child development center, and outreach designed to meet a rapidly changing Inglewood, where Latino residents now make up more than 60% of the local population, and new development around SoFi Stadium and the Intuit Dome is reshaping the surrounding community in real time. Foster has said he expects it could take 2 or 3 years before the congregation fully thinks of him, rather than Ulmer, as simply our pastor, and he seems genuinely at peace with that timeline rather than rushing it. What makes this whole story worth telling isn't just that a well-known pastor retired. Leaders step down every year, in churches, in companies, in nonprofits, and it rarely goes this smoothly. What makes Bishop Ulmer's exit worth studying is the mechanics of how he did it, identifying a successor nearly a decade in advance, deliberately restructuring the institution away from dependence on his own personality, gradually transferring real authority in public view rather than symbolically on paper, giving the people he served a full year to emotionally process the change before it happened, and then actually stepping back once the handoff was complete instead of hovering over his successor's shoulder. It's a case study in something almost every organization eventually has to face, and almost none prepares for well. How do you leave something you built without leaving it broken? Bishop Ulmer's answer wasn't complicated, but it was disciplined. See farther than you can go, find someone who can go farther than they can currently see, and then have the courage to actually hand them the mountain. If there's a lesson in this story for anyone building anything that's meant to outlast them, a business, a family legacy, a community organization, it's that succession isn't a single announcement. It's a discipline you practice for years before anyone ever has to hear about it. If you found this story as compelling as we did, let us know in the comments what leadership transition, in church, business, or anywhere else, you think handled it the right way. And subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the leaders, institutions, and moments that don't always make the front page, but absolutely should.